Sometimes the people who share your blood walk away first, and the ones who choose you become your real family. The automatic doors of St. Andrew's Medical Center slid open with a quiet hiss as 72-year-old Evelyn Brooks sat motionless in her wheelchair, a faded blue blanket resting across her knees, while the cool October breeze carried the scent of fallen maple leaves through the parking lot. Only 6 weeks earlier, she had been the woman who baked pies for every new family on the block, remembered every birthday on her church calendar, and never missed a chance to wave at children riding their bicycles down Maple Avenue. Then the stroke changed everything. The right side of her body moved slowly now. Her speech came in careful fragments, and every simple task demanded more courage than most people could imagine. Yet none of that hurt as much as what happened next. Standing only a few feet away were her 3 daughters, Amanda, Jennifer, and Lisa, well-dressed, successful, each holding a phone, each avoiding their mother's eyes as if looking at her for too long might somehow become an obligation. Their conversation was quiet at first, then sharper, then painfully practical. Amanda insisted she traveled too often for work. Jennifer explained that her townhouse had too many stairs. Lisa said her children were already overwhelmed with school and activities. Every excuse sounded polished, reasonable, almost rehearsed, but together they formed something heavier than silence. Evelyn lowered her eyes to her trembling hands, pretending to smooth the edge of the blanket while listening to the daughters she had once carried through fevers, broken hearts, and impossible dreams decide who would not be taking her home. A discharge nurse shifted awkwardly beside the wheelchair, clipboard still tucked beneath one arm, clearly wishing the conversation would end differently. It didn't. One by one, the daughters offered hurried apologies, promised to call soon, climbed into separate SUVs, and disappeared beyond the rows of parked cars until only the fading sound of engines remained. The parking lot suddenly felt much larger than before. Cars came and went. Nurses hurried, past carrying coffee cups. A father laughed as he lifted his toddler into a pickup truck. Life continued without noticing the elderly woman sitting alone beneath the hospital entrance. Evelyn tried to straighten herself, refusing to cry where strangers could see. She had spent an entire lifetime protecting other people from worry. Old habits were difficult to abandon. She reached for the wheelchair rim with her stronger hand, hoping she could somehow push herself toward the sidewalk, but the chair barely moved an inch before stopping against a crack in the pavement. She closed her eyes for a brief second, gathering what little strength remained. Then a young voice drifted across the quiet afternoon. "Ma'am, would you like a little help?" Evelyn opened her eyes slowly. Across the street stood a skinny 12-year-old boy wearing a faded red hoodie, a backpack hanging from one shoulder, and sneakers covered with fresh grass stains. He had clearly been walking home from school. He looked no different from hundreds of ordinary American kids, except for one thing. While everyone else had found a reason to keep walking, he had stopped. Without waiting for permission from anyone else, Noah Carter crossed the street carefully, stepped onto the hospital driveway, placed both hands gently on the wheelchair handles, and offered the warmest smile Evelyn had seen in weeks. Neither of them knew it yet, but that quiet moment in an ordinary hospital parking lot was about to change 2 families forever. Evelyn looked up at the boy for several quiet seconds before managing the smallest smile, one that seemed almost surprised to still exist. Her words came slowly, softened by weeks of speech therapy. "Thank you," Noah answered with a shrug that only a 12-year-old could manage. "My mom says nobody should leave the hospital alone." He carefully guided the wheelchair toward the curb where the afternoon sun painted long shadows across Maple Avenue. Every few feet, he slowed down, making certain the wheels rolled smoothly over the uneven sidewalk. Neither of them spoke much during the short walk, yet the silence felt warm instead of awkward. When they reached the small white house with blue shutters that Evelyn had called home for more than 40 years, Noah paused and looked at the overgrown flower beds lining the front porch. The late-season marigolds had wilted. Dry leaves covered the brick walkway. A mailbox leaned slightly to one side, still decorated with a faded wooden apple Evelyn had painted years before. Everything looked as though time itself had stopped waiting for her. Noah gently unlocked the front gate after finding the spare key exactly where Evelyn quietly directed him, beneath a smooth river stone beside the porch steps. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon, old books, and freshly washed blankets. Family photographs filled nearly every wall. There were pictures of 3 smiling little girls holding homemade birthday cakes, school trophies, Christmas mornings beside a tall pine tree, and one faded photograph of Evelyn wearing pale blue nursing scrubs while standing beside her late husband, Richard, whose arm rested proudly around her shoulders. Noah studied the pictures with genuine curiosity. "Those are your daughters?" he asked. Evelyn nodded slowly. "When they were little." Her eyes lingered on one photograph where Amanda had scraped her knee during a neighborhood bicycle race. Evelyn remembered carrying her inside, cleaning the cut, and promising that every scar would someday become a story. Another picture showed Jennifer wrapped in a blanket after recovering from pneumonia. Lisa appeared in a kindergarten graduation cap that kept sliding over her eyes until everyone laughed. Every memory hanging on those walls had been built with sacrifice. After Richard passed away from a heart condition nearly 3 decades earlier, Evelyn had worked double shifts as a registered nurse at the county hospital. She slept only a few hours most nights, packed school lunches before sunrise, attended every parent-teacher conference, and somehow still found enough energy to read bedtime stories before the girls fell asleep. Vacations disappeared so dance lessons could continue. New dresses for herself became college tuition payments instead. She never complained because she believed love was measured by what a parent quietly gave away. Noah listened without interrupting as Evelyn slowly pieced together fragments of her story. He was too young to fully understand everything she had endured, but he understood enough to recognize loneliness when he saw it. Before leaving, he noticed several unopened prescription bags resting on the kitchen counter and an almost empty refrigerator containing little more than milk, eggs, and half a loaf of bread. He quietly closed the refrigerator door without saying a word. "I will be back after homework," he said with complete certainty. Evelyn looked at him, confused by how naturally those words had been spoken. People had spent weeks explaining why they could not stay. Somehow the smallest promise came from the youngest voice. The next afternoon, the neighborhood settled into its familiar rhythm as sprinklers clicked across green lawns, delivery trucks rolled slowly down Maple Avenue, and children raced home before the streetlights would eventually glow. True to his word, Noah appeared on Evelyn's front porch with his backpack still slung over one shoulder and a brown paper grocery bag balanced carefully in his arms. Inside were a loaf of whole wheat bread, a carton of soup, fresh bananas, and a small container of applesauce. Grace Carter stepped up behind her son carrying another reusable bag filled with vegetables, oatmeal, and a bouquet of bright yellow daisies gathered from the discount shelf at the neighborhood market. She smiled warmly as Evelyn opened the door with deliberate effort. "I hope you do not mind," Grace said gently. "Noah told me you had just come home, and nobody should have to figure everything out alone." Evelyn's eyes filled with quiet gratitude as she slowly welcomed them inside. While Grace stocked the refrigerator and checked expiration dates on medication, Noah wandered into the front yard carrying a pair of old gardening gloves he had discovered hanging in the garage. Without being asked, he began pulling weeds from the flower beds that had once been the pride of the neighborhood. Dry leaves disappeared into lawn bags. Broken branches were stacked neatly by the curb, and before sunset the small white house looked a little more alive than it had in weeks. Across the street, neighbors noticed the quiet activity. Some waved. Others whispered to one another, wondering why a middle school boy seemed more devoted to the elderly widow than her own family. Evelyn watched everything through the living room window, sunlight reflecting softly across the glass. Every few minutes Noah looked up, flashed a cheerful smile, and returned to his work as though helping someone was the most ordinary thing in the world. Later that evening, Evelyn's cell phone buzzed across the kitchen table. Amanda's name appeared on the screen. With hopeful hands, Evelyn answered as quickly as she could. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Amanda apologized for being busy, promised to visit after an upcoming business trip, and ended the call before asking how her mother was truly feeling. 20 minutes later, Jennifer sent a short text message asking whether the physical therapist had arrived yet, followed immediately by another message explaining that work meetings would keep her unavailable for several weeks. Lisa reacted to neither the missed calls nor the voicemail Evelyn struggled to leave. The silence after each conversation lingered far longer than the words themselves. Grace quietly placed 2 steaming bowls of chicken noodle soup on the kitchen table without commenting on the calls. She understood that some disappointments were too personal for advice. Noah simply sat beside Evelyn and began telling funny stories about his science teacher accidentally setting off the classroom smoke detector during an experiment. Before long, Evelyn laughed, softly at first, then a little louder. It was the first genuine laugh to echo through the old house since the stroke. The sound seemed to settle gently into every room, awakening memories that had been sleeping beneath weeks of loneliness. As dusk settled over Maple Avenue and porch lights flickered on one by one, two houses stood facing each other across the quiet street. One held every comfort money could not buy. The other had just begun, proving that kindness often arrives long before miracles do. Over the following weeks, a gentle routine settled over Maple Avenue, quiet enough that most people would have overlooked it, yet meaningful enough to change two lives forever. Every afternoon, just after the final school bell rang, Noah crossed the street carrying his backpack in one hand and something useful in the other. Some days it was library books with large print editions that made reading easier for Evelyn. Other days it was fresh vegetables from the weekend farmer's market where Grace volunteered, or a small notebook with wide lines that Noah had purchased using his allowance. He proudly wrote one simple word across the top of each page, then patiently waited while Evelyn practiced saying it aloud. At first the words came slowly, separated by long pauses that seemed to stretch across the entire room. Good morning. Window. Flower. Every successful sentence was celebrated as though it were a graduation speech. Noah clapped. Evelyn laughed softly. Even when a word took 5 attempts, neither of them treated it as failure. It was simply another step forward. Grace watched the quiet progress with growing admiration. She often arrived after work to find Noah sitting beside Evelyn at the kitchen table while the afternoon sunlight spilled across old family photographs. Sometimes they solved crossword puzzles together. Sometimes they listened to classic songs from the 1970s on a small radio that still sat beside the refrigerator. On Saturdays, they baked simple oatmeal cookies using one of Evelyn's handwritten recipe cards. Her right hand still struggled with precise movements, but Noah never rushed her. If measuring 1 cup of flour required several careful minutes, then several minutes was exactly what they took. The sweet scent of cinnamon slowly returned to the house, replacing the stillness that had lingered since the stroke. One crisp Saturday morning, Noah noticed an old wooden bench beneath the maple tree in Evelyn's backyard. Its paint had faded, and one leg leaned slightly to one side. Together they sanded the rough edges, brushed on fresh white paint, and waited for it to dry beneath the warm autumn sun. When the bench was finished, Evelyn rested there for the first time in months, wrapped in a soft cardigan while golden leaves drifted quietly around the yard. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. The cool air carried the familiar scent of fresh grass, distant fireplaces, and apple pie from somewhere farther down the block. Beautiful, she whispered, the word clearer than any she had spoken before. Noah smiled so widely that Grace had to turn away for a second to hide the tears gathering in her eyes. Across town, life continued for Amanda, Jennifer, and Lisa with business meetings, social events, and crowded calendars. Their occasional messages became shorter, their promised visits kept moving to another weekend that never seemed to arrive. Evelyn stopped checking the front window every evening. Instead, she began looking toward the sidewalk at exactly 3:30 each afternoon, knowing a familiar boy with grass-stained sneakers would soon appear, carrying hope disguised as ordinary kindness. Without realizing it, Noah was helping her recover far more than speech or balance. Day by day, he was reminding her that even after unimaginable disappointment, the human heart could still find reasons to trust again. By the time November settled over Maple Avenue, the maple tree outside Evelyn's front porch had surrendered nearly all of its leaves, covering the lawn with a blanket of gold and amber that rustled softly whenever the afternoon breeze drifted through the neighborhood. Life had become comfortably predictable. Noah stopped by every day after school. Grace visited whenever her nursing shifts allowed, and Evelyn's physical therapist smiled each week at the steady progress that determination and kindness had accomplished together. Evelyn could now walk several careful steps using a lightweight walker, and although every movement required concentration, each small victory filled the old house with quiet hope. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, dark clouds gathered much earlier than expected, wrapping the neighborhood in gray light. Noah hurried home from school with his jacket pulled over his backpack as steady rain tapped against rooftops and windows. As he reached his driveway, he glanced across the street out of habit. Every afternoon at exactly the same time, Evelyn would be sitting beside the living room window with a warm cup of tea, waving as he came into view. Today the curtains remained open, but the chair beside the window was empty. Noah slowed his steps. Maybe she was resting, he thought. Still, something did not feel right. A porch light glowed, even though it was only late afternoon. The front door appeared slightly open, moving gently with each breeze. His heartbeat quickened. He crossed the street without hesitation and called her name from the doorway. "Miss Evelyn?" No answer came. The only sound inside the house was the quiet ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway and the steady rain falling outside. Noah stepped inside carefully and found Evelyn sitting on the living room floor beside her favorite armchair. She was awake, breathing normally, but she looked tired and unable to stand after apparently losing her balance while reaching for the television remote that rested only a few feet away. She looked embarrassed more than frightened. "I am so sorry," she whispered slowly. "I could not get up." Noah knelt beside her, keeping his voice calm just as Grace had taught him whenever someone needed reassurance. "You do not have to apologize. I am here." He remembered the emergency instructions Grace had reviewed with him only weeks earlier. Instead of trying to lift Evelyn himself, he called his mother, who was finishing paperwork at the community clinic less than 10 minutes away. Grace answered immediately and instructed Noah to stay beside Evelyn while she contacted emergency medical services as a precaution. Within minutes, trained responders arrived, spoke gently with Evelyn, helped her safely into a chair, and completed a thorough evaluation. After checking her carefully, they explained that she appeared to have suffered no serious injury, but recommended another examination at the hospital because of her recent stroke history. As the responders prepared to leave, one of them smiled at Noah. "You did exactly the right thing," he said. "You stayed calm, you asked for help, and because you paid attention, she got the care she needed." Quickly, sitting inside the ambulance beside Grace, Evelyn looked through the rain-speckled window at Noah, standing quietly beneath a large umbrella. His clothes were damp, his sneakers splashed with mud, and his homework was undoubtedly waiting untouched inside his backpack. Yet he never once complained about the afternoon that had suddenly changed. For the second time since leaving the hospital weeks earlier, Evelyn realized that the first person to notice she needed someone had not been family by birth. It had been the young neighbor who never stopped looking across the street. 3 days later, Evelyn returned home with a renewed determination that surprised even her physical therapist. The examination had confirmed that she had not suffered another stroke, only a frightening reminder that recovery required patience and support. As the front door closed behind her, the familiar scent of cinnamon, polished wood, and fresh flowers welcomed her back. Grace had watered every plant while she was away, and Noah had carefully placed a handwritten note on the kitchen table that read, "The flowers missed you, but I watered them anyway." Evelyn traced the letters with the tips of her fingers before smiling to herself. Outside, the first light snow of the season drifted gently across Maple Avenue, settling quietly on rooftops and bare tree branches. The neighborhood seemed wrapped in a peaceful silence that only winter could create. That afternoon, Noah arrived carrying a small cardboard box. Inside was a collection of old family board games that his grandparents had once played with him. "I thought maybe we could make Tuesdays our game day," he said. "The winner gets the last oatmeal cookie." Evelyn laughed, the sound soft but unmistakably stronger than it had been only a few weeks earlier. They spent the afternoon around the dining room table, moving colorful game pieces one careful turn at a time while golden light filtered through the frosted windows. Every so often, Noah intentionally made a silly mistake just to hear Evelyn correct him. Her words were becoming smoother now. Not perfect, but growing steadier with every conversation. Later, as evening settled over the quiet street, Grace stepped into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of warm herbal tea. She paused when she noticed Noah sitting beside Evelyn on the living room couch, his head resting against the cushion after finishing his homework. At some point, he had fallen asleep without realizing it. His notebook remained open across his lap, one pencil still loosely held between his fingers. Evelyn reached slowly for the knitted blanket folded over the armrest. Her movements were careful and deliberate, but there was confidence in them now. She gently unfolded the blanket and draped it across Noah's shoulders, making sure it covered him completely before smoothing one corner near his arm. For several seconds, she simply watched the boy sleeping peacefully, his breathing slow and steady, completely unaware of the quiet kindness being returned to him. Grace remained standing in the doorway, saying nothing. She knew that interrupting the moment would somehow make it smaller. The room glowed with the warm amber light of a single table lamp, reflecting softly against framed family photographs and the polished wood floor. Snowflakes drifted beyond the window without a sound. The old grandfather clock marked each passing second with its familiar rhythm, yet time itself seemed to slow inside the little house. Evelyn finally whispered, her voice clearer than ever before. "He reminds me that kindness always comes home." Grace felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from witnessing something quietly extraordinary. No speeches had been given. No grand promises had been made. There was only an elderly woman recovering one careful step at a time, a young boy who had chosen compassion without expecting anything in return, and a peaceful winter evening that seemed to hold both of them in gentle silence. In that simple living room, surrounded by ordinary things, the meaning of family had begun to change forever. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, and with every passing week Maple Avenue seemed to awaken alongside Evelyn. The snow disappeared from the sidewalks, flower buds returned to the trees, and the little garden Noah had patiently cared for began showing bright. Patches of yellow daffodils beneath the morning sun. Evelyn's therapist could hardly believe how far she had come. She could now walk across her living room with only a cane, prepare simple breakfasts on her own, and speak in complete sentences without stopping after every few words. She often smiled and credited hard work, but in her heart she knew something even more powerful had helped her heal. Every encouraging word, every shared meal, every afternoon spent laughing over board games had restored parts of her spirit that no medicine alone could reach. One Thursday morning, after finishing another successful therapy session, Evelyn asked Grace if she would drive her downtown to meet with an attorney. Grace glanced at her with quiet curiosity, but never asked unnecessary questions. She simply nodded and helped Evelyn into the car. The law office overlooked the town square, where children chased pigeons near the old courthouse fountain while neighbors greeted one another beneath the warm spring sunshine. Inside the office, attorney Harold Bennett welcomed Evelyn with genuine kindness. He had known Richard decades earlier and remembered when the Brooks family had first moved into the neighborhood. Evelyn placed a neatly organized folder on his desk. Inside were property records, savings documents, insurance information, handwritten notes, and one carefully folded letter. "I would like to update my estate plan," she said calmly. Harold adjusted his glasses, but did not interrupt. Evelyn continued speaking with steady confidence. "I have spent many nights thinking about what truly lasts after we are gone. It is not money. It is not furniture. It is not even a house. It is the opportunities we leave for someone else." She explained that she wanted a scholarship established in Richard Brooks's memory for local students who demonstrated compassion through service to others. She also wanted Noah Carter named as the first recipient when he eventually graduated from high school, with Grace serving on the small community committee that would oversee the scholarship until Noah reached adulthood. Harold looked up from his notes, visibly moved. "This is an extraordinary gift," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled. "No. The extraordinary gift was already given to me. I am simply returning a small piece of it." Before leaving the office, she added one final request. She asked Harold to write personal letters to Amanda, Jennifer, and Lisa. The letters were not filled with anger or disappointment. Instead, they contained memories of scraped knees she had bandaged, bedtime stories she had read, birthdays she had celebrated, and dreams she had helped make possible. At the very end of each letter, she wrote the same gentle sentence. "I hope one day you discover that love grows strongest when it is freely given, never when it is expected." As Grace drove them home beneath rows of blooming dogwood trees, Evelyn rested her hand on the folder, now resting safely in her lap. For the first time since leaving the hospital months earlier, her future no longer felt uncertain. It felt peaceful. Across the street, Noah was already waiting in the front yard, holding two small flower pots and waving excitedly as the car turned into the driveway. completely unaware that the kindness he had offered without expecting anything in return had quietly changed the course of another person's life forever. Nearly a month passed before the letters from attorney Harold Bennett reached Amanda, Jennifer, and Lisa. None of them expected anything unusual when they opened the envelopes. They assumed the documents concerned routine legal updates or medical paperwork. Instead, each daughter found a handwritten letter filled not with blame, but with memories. Amanda paused when she read about the little red bicycle her mother had worked extra night shifts to afford after Amanda had won a neighborhood reading contest. Jennifer stopped at the paragraph describing the winter she had spent in the hospital with pneumonia, when Evelyn had slept every night in an uncomfortable chair beside her bed because she refused to leave her daughter alone. Lisa quietly lowered her letter after reading about the music lessons that Evelyn had paid for by selling the last pieces of jewelry Richard had given her before he passed away. None of the letters mentioned abandonment. None accused them of making excuses. Each one ended with the same simple sentence. I hope one day you discover that love grows strongest when it is freely given, never when it is expected. The words settled heavily into their hearts because they carried no anger, only grace. Several days later, the three sisters found themselves standing together outside the familiar white house on Maple Avenue for the first time in years. The spring sunshine reflected softly against the freshly painted porch railing, while colorful flowers lined the walkway that had once been covered with weeds. Through the living room window, they saw something they had not expected. Noah sat at the dining room table helping Evelyn assemble a small birdhouse from a wooden craft kit. Grace laughed as she handed them cups of lemonade. Evelyn, now walking steadily with her cane, smiled brighter than any of them remembered. There was no bitterness in her expression, only peace. She welcomed her daughters inside with the same warmth she had always shown them. The sisters looked around the home that suddenly felt both familiar and strangely different. Family photographs still covered the walls. Richard's old clock still marked each passing hour. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. The house no longer echoed with loneliness. It was filled with conversation, shared meals, fresh flowers, and quiet joy. Amanda finally lowered her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We thought we had more time. We kept telling ourselves we would come next weekend." Then another week passed. Then another. Jennifer wiped away tears she had been trying unsuccessfully to hide. Lisa stepped closer and gently held her mother's hand, something she had not done in years. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When the room became silent again, she smiled softly and squeezed Lisa's hand. "You do not need to explain the past," she said calmly. "You only need to decide what you will do with tomorrow." The sisters looked at one another, realizing that forgiveness had already been waiting for them long before they gathered the courage to ask for it. Noah quietly stood from the table and carried the unfinished birdhouse toward the porch, sensing the family needed a few private moments together. As he stepped outside, Evelyn watched him through the open doorway with quiet gratitude. The greatest miracle had never been her recovery. It had been discovering that one act of kindness had healed far more than a broken season of her life. It had opened the hearts of everyone connected to it. 1 year later, the first Saturday of May arrived wrapped in warm sunshine and the gentle fragrance of blooming lilacs that drifted through Maple Avenue. The neighborhood gathered in the small community park where colorful banners stretched between the trees announcing the first annual Richard Brooks Memorial Scholarship Celebration. Folding chairs filled the lawn. Children chased one another across the grass, and neighbors who had known Evelyn for decades smiled as they watched her walk confidently across the pathway, with nothing more than a polished wooden cane resting lightly in her hand. Every careful step reflected months of determination, patience, and encouragement. Beside her walked Grace, while Noah, now a little taller than the year before, carried a small wooden plaque engraved with the scholarship's name. Attorney Harold Bennett welcomed everyone before inviting Evelyn to the podium. The applause that followed was warm, heartfelt, and seemed to echo far beyond the little park. Evelyn looked across the crowd and noticed Amanda, Jennifer, and Lisa sitting together in the front row. Their relationship had not become perfect overnight, but they had returned. They visited every weekend now, shared Sunday dinners, helped maintain the house, and listened more than they spoke. Healing, Evelyn had learned, rarely happened all at once. It arrived one quiet choice at a time. She adjusted the microphone and smiled gently before speaking in a clear, steady voice that would have seemed impossible only months earlier. People often ask me what helped me recover after my stroke, she began. Some say it was excellent doctors. Others believe it was therapy or medicine. They are all correct. But there was something else that no prescription could ever provide. Someone noticed me when I felt invisible. Someone stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. That kind of kindness changes more than a day. It changes a life. She turned toward Noah, whose face immediately turned bright red with embarrassment as the audience laughed softly. Evelyn continued, "This scholarship is not about grades alone. It is about compassion. It is for young people who choose to help others when nobody is watching." Harold then announced that Noah Carter would become the first honorary recipient, recognized not for academic achievement alone, but for extraordinary service to another human being. The crowd rose to its feet in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Noah looked toward his mother before walking slowly onto the stage. He accepted the plaque with both hands, then quietly hugged Evelyn. No cameras flashed loudly. No dramatic music played. There was only the sound of applause, birds singing in the nearby trees, and a community witnessing what genuine kindness could become when it was allowed to grow. As the celebration ended and neighbors lingered beneath the afternoon sun, Evelyn paused beside the freshly painted bench under the old maple tree where her journey had truly begun. Noah sat beside her, both of them watching children laugh as they ran through the park. Across the street, the little white house stood exactly where it always had, but it no longer represented loneliness. It represented second chances. Evelyn looked at Noah and smiled with peaceful certainty. "Family," she said softly, "is not only the people who are there when life is easy. Family is the people who quietly choose to stay." Noah reached over and gently held her hand. Neither of them spoke again. They did not need to. The warm breeze carried the laughter of neighbors through the trees while golden sunlight settled across the quiet street. And in that lasting silence, everyone who knew their story could finally understand that the greatest miracles are rarely loud. They begin with one ordinary act of kindness that someone simply decides not to walk past.